Hello, everyone. My name is Christopher Matopoulos. I'm a student physical therapist currently attending the Russell Sage Colleges. And today I will be discussing some classroom strategies that we can use to increase efficacy within our students. The students I will be talking about during my presentation today will mostly be students with developmental disorders. We will be focusing on strategies that we can use within the classroom to improve desirable outcomes within these students with these developmental disorders. When I'm talking about developmental disorders, I'm going to be talking mostly about autism, as this is the population that I think I've seen the most while at my clinical here within the Guilderland school districts. And that is, I think, because about 1% of the world's population is currently diagnosed with ASD. That translates into about 2.3% of children within the United States. I found that boys are about 4 times more prevalent than girls to be diagnosed with autism. But there are also some other developmental disorders that we deal with on a daily basis, and that accounts for about 17% of children can be diagnosed with some other form of a developmental disorder. These developmental disorders might be cerebral palsy. It could be Rett syndrome, could be muscular dystrophy, could be any number of things. But as you can see, this is almost about 20% of our children are diagnosed with some form of a developmental disorder. And this can really translate into a lot of kids, as about 10.8 million children currently attend public schools within the United States. So that means that about 250,000 students within the United States are diagnosed with autism. Of that 250,000, only about 41% of them go on to graduate high school. Of that 41%, 38% will go on to graduate college. And of that 38%, only 28% will go on and become employed. So we can see how, as the level and the difficulty of the educational world increases, the number of students that can find success in those areas also decreases. So what can we do as educators to make sure that number of those who graduate high school, graduate college, or go on to become employed continues to rise instead of fall over time? And some of those things, I think, are being able to create a safe and predictable environment for our children. And what this means and what this will be able to do is create an environment where they're able to thrive. And by them being able to thrive, they will be able to be more attentive to tasks and find success within the classroom. And how we can do this is something that I will talk about a little bit later on, but we should be able to diminish and remove external stimuli. And by external stimuli, I might mean sound or light or surprises, and this could be really anything. But our goal, first and foremost, should be able to provide a predictable and safe environment for our students. The next thing is that our classroom should allow for easy transitions between spaces. We know with a lot of our students that transitioning between spaces can be very difficult. It could be overstimulating for them. And we need to do our best to make sure that they can move between spaces easily. Something that I kept seeing in my research is that we want to avoid what's known as the greenhouse effect with these students. And the greenhouse effect means that it's something that is very overstimulating and can really set our students back for the rest of the day. It's moving from one area to the other, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're hit with all this overstimulating stimuli. And the best way I think I can describe that, and I experience it, is when I wake up in the morning and I go to brush my teeth and go to the bathroom and do my whole morning routine, is I walk into my bathroom, and my bathroom has very bright LED lights in it. So once I flip on the lights, I just went from an extremely dark area to an extremely bright area. And this is very overstimulating for my eyes. So what do? I shut my eyes. I might cover my eyes. Keep my head down until I can physically adjust to the stimuli that just changed. Whereas some of our students might not be able to adjust. And this might really set them off for the rest of the day. So we really need to do our best to allow for easy transitions and avoid this overstimulating effect. And while we're talking about stimuluses within our classroom, we should have high and low stimulus areas. And this is because students within the autism spectrum disorder, it is a spectrum. So students could be very hypersensitive or they could be very hyposensitive. And we need to create an environment where all our students can get all their needs. We don't want to just be tailoring to a few of the students. We should be doing our best to kind of be inclusive and incorporate all of our students. And one way that we can do that is by creating escape areas within the rooms. This is kind of like the multi-sensory environments that Altamont and Linwood have implemented and have been using. And these environments and these rooms are areas that students can go to every day, incorporate into their schedule to go and meet their sensory needs. They can do tasks that either are high stimuli, very stimulating, or not very stimulating, and they can get that high stimulus or that low stimulus, but it's designed to allow the student to get what they need. And what we can do is create little things within this room that are kind of mini MSC rooms and allow those students to get what they need. Another thing that we need to do within our rooms is compartmentalize it. And what I mean by this is create designated areas, create areas that are meant for work, create areas that are meant for play, and create areas that are meant for eating and for different tasks. And why we do this is because by creating areas that are designated to specific tasks, it tricks our brain or conditions our brain to associate that specific area with a specific task. So if you do math in the same spot every day for weeks and weeks and weeks, as soon as you sit down at that spot or stand up or whatever, as soon as you get to that area, your brain knows, hey, it's time to do math. And that way you're able to focus on your math for a little bit longer than you might be if you did it somewhere different every day. And we really want to do this because in areas that things are very mixed, so that means you're doing multiple tasks in the same spot, your brain can become kind of confused and your attention span really decreases because of this, because your brain doesn't know, hey, if I'm sitting at this desk, is it time to do work? Is it time to play? Is it time to eat? Is it time to chat? Because I do all these things in this spot, so I don't know which one we're doing right now. Another thing that we want to do is create a fluid environment for our students within the classroom. We want to provide them with the ability to move between spaces very easily and transition very easily between spaces. So I think this picture of this room is a great example of a compartmentalized room, but also a fluid room. You have some high stimulus areas and a little bit lower stimulus areas. You can see that one area might be designated for reading and one for math or vice versa, but you can kind of see that you have a designated spot for specific things. And then you have a transition area in between the two that allows you to move between the different areas. So I think this kind of captures exactly what I was talking about with you want to compartmentalize, but create a fluid environment. Within our classrooms, we need to be able to see. And to be able to see, we need light. And thankfully for us, we have this big thing in the sun or in the sky called the sun, and it provides a ton of natural light to us. And natural light can be great. Research shows that only a minimum of 15 to 30 minutes of direct sunlight exposure. So this is sunlight direct to the skin or direct into the eyes, not direct, don't ever stare directly at the sun. But if you're outside and you keep your eyes open, if it's sunny out, sunlight will go into your eyes. So that is direct sunlight. In about 15 to 30 minutes of direct sunlight exposure, you can get your daily vitamin D. You can increase your serotonin and increase your dopamine. These two hormones in our body are specifically associated with feeling good. It's called the happy hormone is serotonin, and your drive hormone, which is dopamine. So you feel better and you're more willing and more participatory and more attentive with those two hormones. And then it also delays and removes melatonin and adenosine. And these are your sleepy hormones, because when it's light out, your body, through the circadian rhythm, which is our sleep wake cycle, knows when it's light out, it's time to wake up. So if we get a lot of light, not a lot, but if we get 15 to 30 minutes within the morning of sunlight, we actually start to wake up and our body starts removing these sleepy hormones, and then increasing our serotonin and dopamine. So increasing our happy and work-related hormones. So yeah, so 15 to 30 minutes of sunlight can do a lot for us. So in short, for this, if you can't be outside, we need to open up the blinds. We need to allow sunlight to come in, because especially now in the winter, we wake up and it's dark, and then we go home and it's dark. So during the day, we need to do what we can to allow natural light to come into our rooms. And when we can't allow natural light to come into our rooms, we need to have artificial light. And I think most of the buildings that I've seen in the Guilderland school districts use fluorescent lighting. And there are some negatives that are definitely have been associated with fluorescent lighting. One of them is they flicker. And for our neurotypical population, this may not be a big deal, but for our neuroatypical population, this can be very, very distracting for our students. They see a flicker and it could catch their eye, and it could actually cause some eye strain and some headaches. So we really want to avoid that. And the reason for that is because fluorescent lighting has a very almost even ratio of electricity that's converted to light versus expressed as heat. So there's a lot of energy that's lost with fluorescent lightings, and that's why it takes so long for fluorescent lightings to, they call it, when it needs to warm up. That's because there's so much of that energy is actually being lost and given off as heat instead of light. There's also a faint humming that's associated with fluorescent lightings. And fluorescent lightings not only have a visual component to it, but there's also an auditory component to it. So for our people that are hypersensitive to things like this can be extremely distracting for them. And imagine this going on all day, every day, whenever you're inside. It would be very, very difficult to get tasks done with that going on. So fluorescent lighting has been associated to cause headaches, eye strain, and an increase in repetitive behaviors because of this flickering and this humming. So with artificial light, we're actually able to increase or decrease the brightness levels. And generally, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about brightness levels, but generally we need to kind of find that Goldilocks area, because we don't want it to be too dim, because we won't be able to focus and everything won't be as clear. But if it's too bright, it'll increase our off-task behavior, because students will actually become hyperactive. So it's really important for us to kind of find that somewhere in the middle, that perfect level of brightness. So here's a little bit of a visual for our lights. And we can see it starts with candlelight and all the way up to LEDs. So when we're looking at our LEDs, what we're looking at is that they have a very high level of efficiency. And what this means is that I mentioned earlier about fluorescent, about them having a close ratio between electricity or power given off as light versus heat. LEDs, it's about a 95% of the electricity is given off as light, and about 5% is lost in heat. So that is a much, much larger ratio, which means that these bulbs are much, much more efficient. And efficiency is always good. Increase in lifespan is always good. And color rendering may be one of the minor drawbacks that's associated with LEDs. And this color rendering is given off mostly in blue light. And blue light has been starting to get linked to some negative things, which we will talk about now. So blue light is mostly associated with devices. Devices give off a blue light. It's just how we are able to see them when it's bright and sunny out. This level of light allows us to see it at all times during the day. But we have been starting to see, research has been starting to show some very negative things that is associated with blue light. So just so everyone following along has a understanding of what blue light is you can actually modify this on any of your smart devices. So I'm sorry for those of you that do not have a iPhone, but what you can do with an iPhone is if you go to your settings, so You can go to your settings, give you a second to catch up. Then you can go to displays and brightness. Once we're at displays and brightness, you can click on what you can see down there is called night shift. Once we click on night shift, what you can do real quick, just to mess around with it and play around with it a little bit, you can hit the switch that says manually enable until tomorrow. And then right below it, you have this slider that goes between less warm and more warm. And as you slide it back and forth, you start to see how on the more warm side, it's more warm. It's literally what it sounds like. It's more warm. It uses warmer colors. It turns almost a little bit more orange. Or if you go to less warm, it turns a little bit bluer. It's a little bit clearer. So this is actually the blue light. As you move into less warm, your phone is emitting more blue light. It becomes a little bit clearer. As you move to more warm, it is giving off more or less blue light. And what this means is the blue light is being emitted less through your screen. And this is what has been being shown to actually damage your retina over time. Your retina is the part of the eye that actually takes in light, transmits it, and sends it to your brain. So by damaging this, you have too much blue light going in and damage your retina. And this can lead to things like dry eye, cataracts, or macular degeneration. And these are typically known as kind of old people's diseases. You don't really hear of many young people getting cataracts, but we are starting to see that a lot more because of this prolonged exposure to blue light. Some other negative effects of blue light is that it can actually delay your circadian rhythm. Your circadian rhythm, I mentioned earlier, is your sleep-wake cycle. So by using blue light, especially later on in the day, it can delay the sleep-wake cycle. So it can delay you going to sleep and it keeps you awake, which then in turn will make you sleep less. Students that sleep less come to school tired in the morning. Students that come to school tired are not as attentive. And then the cycle kind of continues over time and students become less attentive and more tired because they go home and they use their devices late at night to do their homework and to do their schoolwork and all that. So we really need to keep this in mind moving forward within our classrooms. So I talked earlier a little bit about LED lights and the color rendering giving off more blue light. So this is one of the few side effects that I found actually with LED lights is that they produce a much higher concentration of blue light compared to fluorescent. And this is because they're much more efficient and they give off much higher levels of light. So we just talked about some of the negative uses of technology, but technology can be really beneficial. And I think we need to keep that in mind. It's not all bad. In this study, they looked at iPad use, and they used iPad for the same task as they would as a pencil and paper. So they would do a task like math. And one day they would do it with pencil and paper. One day they would do it with an iPad. And they would see how the students' behavior would change, how long it took them to complete that task and whatnot. And what they found is that when they used the iPad for academic purposes alone, the students on the day for the iPad found that they had improved behavior and improved time to completion for those tasks. So I think this also highlights a little bit of the benefits associated with technology, but we do need to keep in mind that it is important to use traditional methods like pencil and paper and other methods to problem solve instead of just always relying on technology. Continuing on with our light, I'm going to back it up with a little research now. So this study looked at lighting as how it is with the visual perception, so how people actually take in the light. So they had two settings for light, and they had typical adults sit in a room with light and complete tasks. And they had two levels for the light, 100 lumen and 1,000 lumen. So 100 lumen was described as like a dimly lit hallway. It wasn't, You could see, but you wouldn't want to read in that hallway. Where 1,000 lumen is like Macy's or a department store, where it's an extremely bright area. So the adults that completed these tasks described that 100 lumen was described as more pleasant and calming, where 1,000 was bright, exciting, and even warm. So here, just based off light, we can create a calming environment by using a lower level of light, or increase arousal by turning up the lights. So I thought that was pretty interesting. The lights also were measured in Kelvin, which is heat. So they found that lights that give off 6,000 or more Kelvin led to poor sleep. People felt fearful for tasks, and it increased their overall levels of stress. So this is also something that's associated with brighter lights. Brighter lights produce more power. More power means more heat. So that's something that we need to keep in mind when we're designing our classrooms for lighting. We want something that's not too bright and not too warm. The study also looked at color and how color might affect responses to task. And what they found were that cooler colors elicit a less negative response to task. And by cooler color, we're talking more about the blues and a little bit more of the greens and the purples, whereas warmer colors are red, orange, yellow, that kind of thing. So I think this highlights a little bit that we need both high and low stimulus areas. The high stimulus increases our arousal. So we need, maybe in the morning or when we want our students to wake up and become a little bit more attentive, we want to turn up the lights. But if our students are a little bit too hyperactive, what we can do is actually dim the lights a little bit, allowing them to bring themselves back down. So something to keep in mind moving forward. So here's an example of a high stimulus and a low stimulus classroom. We can see one classroom very dull, a lot of dull colors, a lot of earthy colors. You got your brown and you got some green. There's not much on the walls. This is the kind of class that there's really not much going on and it can be pretty boring. But you can also see there's a classroom with a lot of contrasting colors. You got your yellows, your blues, your pinks, your whatever, your greens. So we need to kind of find something in the middle, or we need to provide an environment that has both, because some students really need that very high stimulus, but some students are already overstimulated. So we need a low stimulus area to kind of bring them back down. Unfortunately, this is going to kind of take some playing around with for our classroom teachers to see what is most beneficial that they found within their own classrooms. So just some general things to avoid when we're talking about specific lighting. Curtains and blinds. And curtains and blinds can be beneficial, but can also be very, very harmful. And what I'm referring to here is blinds and curtains that actually block out natural light, because natural light is very, very important for us as human beings. There are a lot of benefits associated with it, and we don't want to block any of that out. What we can use is sometimes the natural light can be a lot, especially if a window's facing eastbound, you get almost direct sunlight, especially in the morning. So we can use a see-through, kind of like in this image I have presented, a see-through blind that just kind of dims that natural light coming through. It doesn't quite block it, but it does turn it down. We want to avoid glare. Glare can be very, very overstimulating for some of our more visually sensitive students. So things to avoid within the classroom: tile, metallic paints, metal objects, mirrors, things of that sort, things that allows light to bounce off of and continue to travel. It can be very hard for some of our students to walk around in a room all day where light is bouncing off the walls, off the floor, off the screens, off everywhere. Very, very overstimulating for students and can cause some visual fatigue for them. Flickering bulbs might not be a big deal to our neurotypical people, but for our atypical people, this can be very, very distracting for them. And fluorescent lighting. Fluorescent lighting, I talked about earlier, cause eye strains, headaches, increase in repetitive behaviors. There were not many positives that I found with fluorescent lighting. So once we're done talking with lights, the next external stimuli that maybe we can try and limit within our classrooms is sound. So acoustics, what can we do within the classroom to decrease the sound? Because a lot of our students with autism are what's known as hyperacusis, and they're sound sensitive. And what this means is that they are very, very sensitive to specific frequencies. So what this means is that there are certain people and certain ages and whatnot that can hear different frequencies. You always hear that a dog can hear more than a human. So a dog can hear a frequency that we can't. But this is the same thing with children. There are certain things that we can hear or that they can hear that we cannot. For instance, right now, I'm playing a sound that anyone over 30 should not be able to hear, but I can hear it, and a lot of our children can hear it. So this is something that we really need to pay attention to, because there are things that we physically cannot hear that they can hear. This could be a humming from a fluorescent light. This could be a toy that is making a lot of noise. It could be a microphone that is too close together. It could be anything. And so it's just something that we need to take into account, is that there are so many things that we physically and cannot process that they deal with on a daily basis. So what can we do is that we can design our classrooms to remove external auditory stimuli. And what I mean by this is external auditory stimuli is stimuli coming from the outside in. So we need to really limit background noise. And what I mean by this is I've been in a couple of our classrooms. It's the kindergarten classroom at Altamont, to be specific, that's right next to the music room. And, when they're doing drums or when it's recorder day and we're sitting in there and we're trying to get something done, it's very, very distracting to hear, that music being played right next door. And for our typical people, we can tune that out over time, but for our atypical people, we cannot. So we need to think that for something that's might be simple or easy to comprehend for us, it's almost impossible for them to do. And something that I can talk about that is briefly like this, our human brain processes our noses. You can see your nose. Our brain is just so used to seeing it that it gets rid of it. Our brain is able to do that. Our brain is able to tune background noise out so that way we continue on with our tasks. A lot of our students cannot. I'm not sure if you can hear it right now, but we have, the heat going in my house, and in our classrooms, we have vents and shafts and all these other things that are going on at all times. And we are able to tune that out, but they are not. So it's just something that we really need to be aware of. So one thing that we can do to actually help remove this external stimuli is we need to make use of tapestries or rugs and door covers and whatnot that can actually provide one more thing for sound to bounce off before it comes into our room. Just like light, sound bounces around. So if we can provide multiple things for the sound to bounce off of, a lot of it might get drowned out. Tapestries and rugs are also a great way to get rid of glare. So there you go. There's a 2-for-1 right there. You can decrease glare and also decrease sound right there. Another way that we can limit background noise is by using music. Music at a moderate volume was actually shown to increase attention and increase responsiveness to tasks. And this music is music without sound. So things with like flutes, drums, stringed instruments, mostly acoustical things. So no voice, no singing, nothing like that. Nature sounds was also found to be very beneficial. So this is like your ocean waves or running streams or, summer night forest type things. But also jazz and classical music was also found to be very beneficial. And classical music specifically from the Largo movement. And this movement was a very, very old movement, but this movement was mostly around 40 BPM. So this is 40 beats per minute. So this is a very, very slow rhythmic based type of music. So these are some of the things that we can do to remove acoustic external stimuli. So we talked about lighting and what to use and how to use it, but now we can talk about specifically using it to develop new skills. This is a pretty interesting study that used black light training with a white object. So this is extremely contrastable visually. And what they did was that they tried to teach a student how to perform a new task, but they used the black light. And under the black light, what they saw was that the student had improved attention during this time, improved engagement, and adapted quickly to a new routine versus non-black light training. So we need to kind of take this and adapt with it and kind of figure out, okay, if we provide a student with extremely contrasting colors, it's a little bit more obvious to them. They're able to pay attention to it a little bit more. They're able to engage with it more. It's easier for them to see and process. And by adding in all these things, they might actually be able to do things a little bit more quickly. So I think this is something that we need to take and maybe test out in some of our students and see how they respond. So I've mentioned a couple of times about attention, and I will mention it a couple more times. But before I go on, I really want to talk about a child's attention span. What do I mean by this? So this is a typical child, typical, not atypical. So this is a typical child, how old they are, and how much time they can hold their attention on a single task. And as you can see, at 16 plus years, it pretty much peaks out at about 30 to 45 minutes. The only time you start to see some difference in these numbers is as we get older and we find tasks that we find very, very interesting, as our attention span goes up. But for most people on most school-related tasks, the maximum time that they'll be able to spend on one thing is about 30 to 45 minutes. But in the elementary school, you're lucky if you get 30 minutes out of a student. So I think if we can increase their attention in any way and hold it, that's great. But we also need to remember that we're not holding their attention for long. So maybe doing tasks for, 5-10 minutes at a time, then taking a quick break and doing something else, and then returning to it is a great strategy that you can use within your classrooms to hold a child's attention for a longer period of time over time. Instead of doing 30 minutes all at once, do 10 minutes, 2-minute break, 10 minutes, 2-minute break, and then do it that way instead. Another strategy that we can use is dynamic seating. This is something that a lot of classrooms, I think, now are starting to adopt, and as they should, because there are some very, very interesting studies out there that show that dynamic seating is actually very beneficial. So one study looked at a fitted exercise ball, cushion chairs, and a wooden chair. And what they found was that over time, a fitted exercise ball improves sitting behaviors and on-task behaviors, and a cushion chair increases sitting time. So we're seeing that versus a wooden chair, dynamic seating is allowing our students to improve sitting behaviors, on-task behaviors, and sitting time. And this is, I think, because, and they thought in the study, because if you are so focused on sitting, you have less time to be stimulated by external stimuli. So you're more willing to be attentive to the task that you're performing because you're worried or you're physically working to stay seated. Whereas in a normal wooden chair that might be uncomfortable, it's easy to sit in, so you're easily distracted. Another study looked at wiggle seats versus normal seats. So normal seats being like the wooden chair, but they weren't wooden. They were your more typical classroom seats. And what they found were that wiggle seats increased attention, increased persistence, increased participation. Students became less disruptive and less distracted by external stimuli. So these two studies really show that using dynamic seating within a classroom can really have a beneficial effect on our students. I just talked briefly a little bit about working to stay seated, but I'm also a physical therapist, so I need to talk about physical activity. And this table, which was taken from the CDC, shows that the age, how much time they should work, the level of activity, then actually the percentage of people that actually meet those requirements. So for most of our children within the elementary setting, they should be working or exercising every day between active play and up to a vigorous activity. We can see that for most people, less than 25% of us, adults and children, meet their daily exercise requirements. And I think this directly correlates with the increasing rise of obesity in our country, especially childhood obesity, which has been slowly increasing every year for the past like 10 or so years. So something that we really need to keep a close eye on. I think something that captures this pretty perfectly is that in the United States, you are more likely to be a millionaire than to have a six-pack. So a smaller percentage of our population has six-packs than are actually millionaires. So something to think about. And why is physical activity so important besides for our own physical bodily health? It's also correlated with improved academic success. So there were a lot more studies on college students, and I think this is reflected because there are a lot of college students. College students want to do well, and college students' grades are very tangible. Maybe not tangible, but they are numerical. You get a physical grade. You have a GPA, you have a 97%. It's very easy to look at and see changes. Whereas in our elementary school levels, it's not as easily to numerically find out our grades. But what they found in a study with 2,100 or 21,000 undergraduate students at NC State, so that's North Carolina State University, is that increasing exercise by 1 hour per week increased the average GPA for the year in students by 0.06%. So this is an improvement of 1.5 percentage points, which is a pretty significant improvement for, some of our students that are, I know myself in college, fluctuating between, one letter grade and another. I would have definitely taken that 1.5% on many occasions. And the same study also found that increasing exercise by 3 hours per week increased that student's chance of graduation by 49%. So just by increasing exercise by an hour to 3 hours a week really, really has a significant effect on your overall academic performance. A similar study done in the University of Illinois found out that increasing the time, I'm blanking on the word, increasing the amount of times worked out per week. So increases GPA. So they found that 3 or more times exercising per week, those people had an average GPA of 3.61, while people who worked out less than 1 time per week had a GPA of 3.43. So pretty significant difference between those who exercise multiple times a week and those who do not. But how does that translate to our elementary school children? This study looked at adolescent children within the school setting and found that acute exercise showed a moderate increase in attention. So this is when you quickly, drop down and do 10 push-ups or squats or jumping jacks or whatever, and then performed an academic task, found that those students had an increase in attention. Well, the study also found that longitudinal physical activity, so this is physical activity that goes on for a longer period of time, so more longer duration, so doing it for 3 months every day for 3 months or a year or whatever, shows that those students had an increase in executive function, increase in academic performance, and an increase in attention. So I think physical activity is definitely something that our students and even our adults, if you want to see better success academically and within the workplace, start exercising daily. I mentioned earlier about creating a safe and secure environments for our students. And one way that we can do this is creating structure and predictability. This study looked at the use of social stories and visual schedules on students and looked at their behaviors over time. And what they found was that by using social stories and visual schedules, students had improved on-task behavior. They had the time between transitions decreased, and it decreased students' low days. So I think showing and using social stories and visual schedules really helps our students internalize what's going on throughout the day, where they need to go, and what's coming. And by doing that, it allows them a little bit easier of a time moving between things and dealing with things as they come within the classroom. So where does it all end? I think academically, where it all ends is eventually students go to college or graduate school and continue moving on. So I think it's important for us to look at college and see the students that do reach that highest level academically, what do they find helps them the best? What do they need within an inclusive classroom? So this study looked at college level students with autism that were incorporated inclusively within the classrooms. And what they found was that the students reported an increase in self-efficacy was seen in students where their teachers had 11 or more years of experience, higher levels of education, and higher levels of training. So these students thought and felt that within the classroom, students with more experience, more education, and a lot of training, they felt that they were able to adequately meet the needs of the students within their classrooms. When the staff was interviewed within that same study about any perceived barriers to students' success, what they felt, the staff reported what they felt was students had barriers to success when staff was underprepared, when classrooms had inadequate resources, when the administration of the schools did not support them, and there was an inadequate emphasis on inclusive instructional strategies. So strategies of bringing in these students into an inclusive setting and working with them were what the staff felt were barriers to these students' success. So in summary, what I think our classrooms need to do for this population of students is create a safe environment for the student. We need to remove external stimuli, and we need to make that environment as predictable as possible, so in that way they can focus on the tasks they need to within the classroom. We need to provide plenty of options for seatings. The students are on a spectrum. So they might need something that moves around. They might need something that's a little bit more stable, but we need to have the options for them so that way they can find what they need within the classroom. And this can also change depending on the time of the day or the day. One day they might need something more stable, and one day they might need something that wiggles. So we need to have both options ready for them so in that way they can find it when they need it. We need to create designated work and play areas. So this goes into the compartmentalization part. We need to design areas that are meant for specific tasks. And that way our brains are ready to go when we reach that specific area. We need to pair academic tasks following activity. Academic tasks associated with physical activity shows improved attention and improved ability to perform those tasks. Natural lighting is important, but we also need to remember to keep our lights low, not too low, but we need to keep them low. We don't want it to be overstimulating for our students. But I think probably most importantly, we need to remember to be flexible. We need to be able to provide students with what they need, and this could be any number of things. And two students could need two totally separate things. So we need to be flexible and work with those students. So that's it. That's all I have. I want to thank everyone very much for bringing me into your school, bringing me into this community. I really did enjoy my time here, and I hope everyone learned something from this in-service presentation. If you have any questions, my email was on the first slide. It is moutoc@sage.edu. Or you can reach out to Kelly Vrooman, the physical therapist, and she can reach out to me, or she might be able to answer some of your questions as we discuss this very much in depth. So I want to thank everyone very much for listening, and have a good day. Goodbye.